Today is January 24th, 2024. My name is Cameron Wood. I'm here at the Ohio History Connection with Dr. Howard Fradkin, and we are going to talk about his work in the trauma field in Columbus, Ohio. Dr. Fradkin, can you please say and spell your name for me?
Sure, it's Howard, Howard, Fradkin, Fradkin.
Thank you very much. Where and when were you born?
I was born in Baltimore, Maryland, 1952, October 3rd.
What was it like growing up in Baltimore back then?
We mostly lived in the suburbs. Baltimore was probably like Columbus, was very not well developed, and there was, like a couple buildings downtown, and it was very white where I grew up in the suburbs, and the city since then has grown tremendously. It is now like a big urban city, but back then it seemed like it was pretty small. The airport was small, and
yeah. What did your parents do for a living?
My father sold vending machines and things that you put in vending machines and some games. My mother was a stay-at-home mom for a while. Then she worked for my father doing his books, and then eventually worked for the state of Maryland doing accounting.
So kind of, he had a route that he ran. Is that the kind of work he was
No,
doing?
he actually was one of the people who sold everything that people would use on their routes. So one of our childhood projects or things we got paid for was that we would fill up capsules. Remember the little capsules that had charms in them? So we would fill the capsules with charms, and if you filled 500 capsules or 1,000, you'd get $1 or something crazy like that. And then we made displays to put in the front. So we had a machine that you put a little card on, and you put all the little toys on it, and then you put this other thing on it, and it sealed it. And so we could put that at the front of the vending machine so people would know what they were putting their penny or 5 or nickel in to get whatever it was that they were getting that particular day.
Right. Well, that's got to be a kind of a fun thing for kids to work on.
It was fun.
Yeah.
It was fun. Tedious,
Right, yeah.
I mean, 1,000 capsules is a lot.
Did you end up having a big collection of the little toys? Or?
No, I did not.
Wow.
We did not collect any of them. They all went for him to sell.
Let's put it this way. As a young person, what were you interested in?
I was pretty shy back then. So eventually, like in, I don't know, maybe 6th grade, I started volunteering on the playground. So I got to have some responsibilities. So then it didn't feel like, because I was not very good at sports at all, but I could lead sports. I could lead like kickball or dodgeball or things like that. So I worked on the playground. I worked as a skate boy and gave out skates. I was telling somebody yesterday that I taught kids how to roller skate. Again, I wasn't very good, but just good enough that I could teach a little kid how to skate forward and even how to skate backwards. And occasionally I could turn. That was my. But that was about it. So I learned how to roller skate and work there, and eventually I worked at camps for. Summer camps for kids, and a couple summers I worked in an amusement park in Baltimore in the games area. So I was one of the guys who would spin the wheel, and one time, and and you got a a stuffed animal. So I had to like give change. I had to learn how to like put all those little nickels or dimes or whatever they were in my hand and, shovel them out. And so people would have, change to play it. And they had to make sure that their dime was up in the top part of there was a little square at the top and then down here. So what they would do is they would wait until the wheel had stopped them. They would slip their little dime right there on the end. I mean, no, it has to be the top. That's the only time it counts. And it was pretty crazy. I mean, there were a lot of people who played these games, and
Right.
so we gave out tons of all sorts of kinds of stuffed animals, and so did that for a couple summers, and then by then I went to college.
And what did you go to college for initially?
I initially wanted to teach in the inner city. So I had read like Jonathan Cazole and a couple other educators' books and thought, oh, that would be really fun. So I decided to go to Temple University in downtown, in the ghetto of northern Philadelphia, and did that for a couple years. And I eventually wound up deciding instead to major in recreation and leisure studies. And there was a specialty in therapeutic recreation. So that was for anybody who was either physically disabled or emotionally disabled. So like I did a practicum at the United Cerebral Palsy Association and helped the people there learn how to engage in recreational activities. And then in my senior year, I worked at a camp right down the hill from Camp David, where the presidential retreat is, up in the mountains in the Catoctin Mountains in Maryland. And that was really fun. And learned how to drive a truck so I could actually drive the kids up and down those mountains. I mean, imagine learning to drive a stick shift in the mountains. It was crazy. But that was part of the job. So I learned how to do all the programming and decide what the schedule was, and got to work with all the different kids. And it was fun. They were both physically and emotionally challenged. And I still remember this kid who had no legs, so he had artificial legs, and we would play hide and seek in our cabin, and he'd put his artificial legs against the bunk and climb up on top of a closet. And of course, nobody could find. Oh, we got him! It's like, oh no, we have his legs. Where is he?
So, were you interested? Were you instantly drawn to that kind of work? Was it something you had to learn, or?
Well, just from working on the playgrounds, as a teenager. So it was just fun, and it was an opportunity, especially working with these challenged kids, an opportunity to help them explore the environment. I mean, the camp counselors were doing crazy things like the mountains in Maryland were really pretty, and so there were like these. I remember we would take them on a hike, and there was this like big, huge stone that we had to like climb up, and then. Now, mind you, a lot of these kids are in wheelchairs, so we're like carrying them up this rock, and then we get there, and then there's like a rock here and a rock here, and like we're like straddling it and moving the kids from one rock to the next rock to the next rock. I'm sure the insurance people knew about it; they would have gone. These people are crazy. Why are we letting them be unsupervised? But it was like this phenomenal opportunity for these kids to have this experience that they never would have had because they never would have seen anything like that. And it was just gorgeous, just gorgeous. I guess that's why they have the presidential retreat up there, because it's really a pretty area. So did that, and then decided to get a master's in therapeutic recreation. So then I went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And then I worked at a Easter seal camp. And with at the end of that program, they were working on a 3-year research project to study the impact of residential camping on disabled and challenged kids. So they said, you want to get a doctorate? We don't offer a doctorate in recreation, so you'll have to do it in something else. So that's how I wound up in psychology.
Oh, wow.
Because there was a counseling psychology program that I applied to, and I said, I have this 3-year research grant, so you don't even have to pay me, I won't need any extra money. So they were like, sure, come on. And I said I wanted to do leisure counseling. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to help people figure out how to use their leisure time in much more effective ways, which would have been a fun thing to do, but I wound up instead going into in sexuality counseling, because that's about the time I was first coming out. Mm-hmm. So I volunteered for this student organization called the it was a peer counseling service for anybody who had questions about sexuality. So it might have been questions about sexual performance or sexual identity. And so there were a bunch of us who, would just meet with the college kids at that time, and it was fun. And again, it was very rewarding, and that's how I got into feeling like, wow, this is something I'd like to do for a living.
Mm-hmm. And that was when you were in your master's program?
In my PhD.
PhD program.
So I got the master's in therapeutic recreation, and maybe I started at the Human Sexuality Information and Counseling Service. That's what it was called. Okay. There, it is in the back. Psychologists say there's all these folders back there. You just have to figure out how to access it.
Yeah. So, was your coming out experience at this time, was that like a full coming out to your parents and everyone, or is this more of a peer-to-peer?
At first, it was a peer-to-peer. Mm-hmm. Chapel Hill was a really unique place because at the time in North Carolina, Jesse Helms was the senator there, and he was like the most conservative senator maybe ever. I mean, there's lots of people similar to him probably, but nobody quite as far to the right as he was. And I mean, he was just horrid. So North Carolina was a very rural area, kind of like Ohio, where you have all this rural area, and then you have Chapel Hill, and Chapel Hill's this like bastion of liberality, very blue, and mm-hmm. And so it was a great place to come out because the gay bar was a bus ride away, and so it wasn't too bad. Still remember my first trip to the gay bar was called the Electric Company, and it was an old bowling lanes, so it was a deserted bowling lane, so it was huge. And so I remember riding out on the bus, and in order to get in, you had to have somebody vouch for you. So there was another guy sitting across from me on the bus, and somehow, we get to near where the gay bar is, and there weren't many people left on the bus, so we both get off at the same stop, and, so he agrees to, I didn't even know I had to be sponsored. So he vouched for me that I was a good gay boy, and I'd be safe to come in.
How did you find out about the place?
Maybe I was already volunteering for the Human Sexuality Information and Counseling Service by that time. I'm not sure. But, I had at Temple, I knew about my being gay and even had a partner at the time, but had not come out. Mm-hmm. So when I got to North Carolina, it was like, well, gosh, here's my perfect opportunity. I don't know anybody here. And that first night I went out, so I'm in the therapeutic recreation curriculum, and there was a woman at the bar, and she turned out to be a lesbian, and she also was in my program. We're like, what are you doing here? Well, what are you doing here? And the first night I was there, I actually met my first partner, who was there to study linguistic patterns of gay men, because he was in a master's program in speech.
So he was doing research.
He was doing research. That was his cover. And as it turned out, he lived with like 5 other gay men. I mean, it was just so obvious that he was gay. I don't know. But somehow he had to keep this cover. He was from rural North Carolina. So
amazing. You mentioned you were aware of your sexuality earlier. Do you think when do you think you first found your community, that link? Was that in your PhD program, or?
Yeah, that was in Chapel Hill. I actually had a partner in high school. Mm-hmm. And so we had girlfriends, and then we also, played around with each other. And then he went to Trinity, and I went to Temple, and we wrote to each other. And over Christmas break, his mother walked in on us and freaked out, and we lost contact for 20 years, and we're finally back in touch with each other.
Oh, wow.
And communicate pretty regularly. He's out in California, but it's kind of an aside. So, so the Carolina Gay Association had just started when I got there. And so the student government, at the first meeting, I went to the Carolina Gay Association. They had given them $500. They needed a treasurer. And I was like, well, I know how to write a check. All right, you're treasurer. And I didn't think anything about it until I realized that I had to go into the student government office and request money. And so I had to go talk to these secretaries and say, I'm from the Carolina Gay Association. And it was, at that time, it was I was just so afraid that and they were just okay, fine, here's what you do. And it was no big deal, but I just still had all that shame of just feeling am I going to get judged? And so I actually became president of the Carolina Gay Association, and we wound up having the first Southeast gay conference during the time that I was president, which meant that we invited people from all over the Southeast to come to campus, and we had 3 days of programming and just did all these different educational workshops. And there were a few people demonstrating, but nothing very major. It just sort of went off without too much of a hitch because it was Chapel Hill. So
did you ever get any, were you ever discriminated against while you're in Chapel Hill, or was it?
Yeah, there were people who definitely were prejudiced and bigoted, and I wasn't bullied per se. But it was clear that there were people that were not very happy. In fact, my one of the professors in my psychology program, so by that point we're studying about how you work with different people, and so we got to the chapter on working with people with sexual identity, and he was a behavioral psychologist, and so he was teaching us about how you do conversion therapy, which at the time was an accepted practice on the one hand, and on the other hand, there were people within the American Psychological Association who were beginning to say, you know what, this is really unethical because you're basically telling people they're not okay when, this is who they are. And so I raise my hand and say, Dr. Galassi, according to John Davidson, this is really unethical. And he gave me the hardest time. He was not happy that I dared to challenge his authority. And we never got along after that. And we had 4 people in the faculty, so that was a significant problem.
How large was the Carolina Gay Association?
I'd say maybe we had 25, 30 members, something like that. And every once in a while, a woman would come, and I think eventually it changed to the Carolina Gay and Lesbian Association, or maybe even the Carolina Lesbian and Gay Association. I'm not sure. I don't remember that part. Eventually we got more people as time went on, and people felt safer and more comfortable, and we advertised more. And
For how many years were you part of that organization?
Probably the whole time I was there, so 4 or 5 years. I was there from, I would have gone there in 74, and I was there till 79. So during that whole time.
So did you organize, beyond the teaching and learning events, did you organize any kind of marches or anything like that at the time?
I don't think we had any marches back then. We just did like dances and things like that, and just social activities.
Did you have to worry about security for those kind of things, or was it a campus?
It was on campus, and I don't remember there being any specific problems. There might have been, but I don't remember any. It was more kind of a self-selection that either you, if you felt too uncomfortable, you just didn't go. When I was at Temple, I was volunteering on the student newspaper, and on Friday nights or Friday afternoon, the Temple Gay Association was meeting 1 floor below me in the student union, and I was like, there's no way I'm going down there. I don't want to be near those people.
Right. What brought you to Columbus then?
So part of becoming a psychologist is you have to do an internship, and so you apply for internships just like people do to get a medical degree. So I applied to several different places and was accepted at Ohio State at the Counseling and Consultation Service to be an intern there, and that was from 79 to 80. So I came up in September, and I had met I met my first partner, the one who was doing research, and when I first got to Carolina, and we broke up toward the end of me being there, and then I met Pete, my husband, who I got married to last year, after being together for 44 years, and so we met in probably 78. And so in 79, in March, is when I found out I was coming to Columbus. I said, "You want to move to Columbus, Ohio?" And he was finishing his nursing degree, his bachelor's in nursing. And so he was like, "Sure." And so he was not out to his parents. I was. By that, I was out to my parents probably maybe a year or two after I started getting comfortable, and thankfully that went relatively easily. So Pete moved up with me and worked at the Counseling and Consultation Service, and advised the Gay Association here on campus at Ohio State during that year that I was there.
How was the LGBTQ community accepted in Columbus as opposed to Chapel Hill? Did you notice differences between the two?
There wasn't much of a community at all. Pete had been told, don't tell anybody you're gay. He was, going to be working at the hospital. He's like, don't tell anybody you're gay, because, so he walked in there being pretty paranoid. And of course, over the course of the next year, he found all these gay people and lesbians were working at the hospital. And soon it wasn't a big deal. But that first year that we were here, and again at the counseling center, I was the only gay, I was the only gay intern. There was one gay staff member who was, I don't think she was out at the time. She eventually became the director and eventually came out, but I don't think she was out at the time. So, and there were clearly people on staff who were very uncomfortable with this, because by then I was like, I'm this out gay man. And I mean, I actually remember walking around Chapel Hill and saying, hi, my name's Howard, I'm gay, which was bizarre. I mean, thinking back on it. But it was just like, I just got to this place where I'm just like, this is who I am. And so if you don't want to talk to me because I'm gay, then, I'll go find somebody else to talk to. And in general, that worked, surprisingly, because I wound up meeting all sorts of people, and most people were like, fine, but there were a few people that were like, so in Columbus, there was no Stonewall, there were very few out people, so it was, there were plenty of gay bars. It's not like there wasn't gay life in Columbus. So there were a number of bars that we found. It's just that the police were very backwards and very oppressive. So it was still a time when people were pretty hesitant to be open. It wasn't at all like Chapel Hill in terms of that more liberal sort of welcoming place. That developed over the next couple years. And I don't remember when the first march was. I'm sure you've talked to people who, we were in the first march. In fact, I remember, I think even before there was a march, there was somebody like Jerry Falwell, but maybe not him, who came to town and were doing some kind of, anti-gay thing. And I remember we marched there at that church, and there were maybe 20 of us. But we didn't wear bags over our heads. I know some people did. But we just, at the time, maybe that was 81 or 82, it was before Stonewall. Not much before it, but it was shortly after that Stonewall developed. And I was not involved with, I was kind of tangentially involved with getting that started, but I wasn't like one of those primary people, like Rhonda Rivera and Doug Whaley and people like that.
Did, well, you mentioned gay bars. What was your preferred bar at that time to go to?
Well, we went to the Grotto, which was it was a Sunday place. Yeah, I remember because they had free hamburgers and hot dogs on Sunday afternoons, so that was a treat. We were both poor, so it's like hamburgers and hot dogs. Oh boy, So and they had great music, and they had a back room, and so we played a lot back then, and there were a few others. There was. I think the Eagle was in town, and I'm blocking. There was another bar right next to it, but I'm not remembering the name right now.
Was it I think the Garage was on Gay Street.
Yeah, the Garage happened after that, I think. There were two bars on 3rd.
There was the Cat's Meow.
Yeah, I did not go to the Cat's Meow, so that was before we got here. I think that closed after that. But I know the grotto was there. That was definitely one of our favorite places. But I know we also danced on Friday and Saturday nights. So there was some other place we went to, and I think whatever that bar was that I'm calling the Eagle actually had another name before that that a woman owned. But I not remember what it was called.
Neither am I.
So I don't know, but there was that bar, and then there was a bar right next to it that was more like the leather bar.
Okay. It wouldn't have been Trade Winds.
Trade Winds.
The Trade Winds? Okay.
That's it.
There it is.
That's it. Trade Winds.
Did you work with the Gay Alliance on campus at all?
I did that first year when I was an intern, and then I left for 1 year and went up to the State University of New York at Fredonia because I couldn't find a job here. So Pete stayed here, and I went up to Fredonia and again worked with the Gay Alliance there. So that was after you finish your internship, you have to do another year of practice before you can get licensed, before you can apply for a license. So that was my year of doing that, and that was a good experience. But it was, the weather was horrid because Fredonia is right on Lake Erie, and I never knew what a snow squall was till then. It's just like, and they hardly ever canceled school. It's just like that's how it is. It's like this all winter long, and so I lived actually right on the lake in Dunkirk, which is the next town over, and had a little apartment that looked out onto the lake, and had one really good friend there, and who was a chef in town. So he cooked every night, and so that was nice. And there were the students that were there, the gay students that were there, were well organized, and so they did a lot of good programs, and I helped them with all that. And thankfully in June I found a job back here at Southeast Mental Health Center because I was commuting every other weekend. So, September, October was fine. It was like a 4.5-hour drive back to Columbus, and Pete was working nights. So that meant that he would work like Friday night, and then he'd get off Saturday morning at 7 a.m. and I'd come in and at maybe 7 p.m. and I'd get to see him before he left for work. And we'd have a little time over the weekend, and then, because I think he worked every other weekend back then, and so it was that was good weather, and bad weather it was 6 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours, because I had a little Pontiac Sunbird, back wheel drive, and barely like staying on the road, but somehow managed to never slide off the road in all that time. So thankfully in June I got a job at Southeast Mental Health Center, and got licensed in 1982 as a psychologist. So I started as a counselor because I still wasn't licensed back then, and Southeast was a really good place. I mean, there was a branch of it way out east, Winchester Pike. So it was in a shopping center. We were next to the Big Bear or whatever it was. So we had an office there, and then we opened an office down on South High Street. So I went back and forth between those two offices. And I was there from 82 till 84. And then I was able to start my own private practice.
So Pete kept you tethered to Columbus in a way.
Oh, yeah, very much.
Yeah. If it hadn't been for him, you might have ended up
might have stayed in Fredonia, but
maybe not Fredonia.
Maybe not Fredonia, but there were nice people there. It's just I did not like that weather at all.
Oh, no. What made you decide to start your own practice? Did you see a need, or?
Oh yeah, I mean there were no openly gay male psychologists in Columbus at the time. I think there was one peer counseling service, and I'm forgetting the name of that. So there was no openly gay psychologist in town. So there was this big opening, and so I initially went into practice with someone else, and that didn't work out too well. So we started Affirmations in '86, I believe. So I had an office up. I think my first office actually was on Henderson Road in a bank building, and then moved down to South Front Street, I think in '86, and started practice with two other people. And they were actually people who I'd met through the Columbus AIDS Task Force. So the Columbus AIDS Task Force got started in
It must have been around, that's 82.
82.
Yeah.
When the first person with AIDS was first diagnosed. I was again in the right place at the right time, and Tom Kinsey was a pastor at St. Stephen's Church, and he organized a meeting to just talk about what the community could do, and a whole bunch of the gay folks in town, a lot of the lawyers, and people like Rhonda Rivera and Doug Whaley, and some other therapists as well were there, and social workers, and then we started the Columbus AIDS Task Force, and again, it was all volunteer to begin with. And one of the first things we did was have a guy from Houston AIDS Task Force, because they were already a little bit ahead of us, came to town and helped us train our first group of buddies, because once we got started, I was the support services chairperson. Now, this is all the time I'm already in private practice. Well, I was, so maybe it was '84, because I think I had started private practice by then. And so I was running my private practice, doing groups, and then started being the support services chairperson. So Tom Kinsey would call me up and say, we got a new referral. And it didn't take long before we had a whole group of clients who needed support. And at that time, of course, there was nothing. There was no way to help them except provide them emotional support, because there were no medical treatments available. And that didn't come until AZT, which I don't know when that was, but I'm thinking it was probably '88 or so. So it was a number of years. And we started the Weekends of Recovery for people with HIV and AIDS in '88. And that was thanks to the very progressive Ohio Department of Health. They hired, one of the first things they did once the AIDS crisis got going is they hired a gay liaison named Buck Harris, and Buck was phenomenal. And the whole staff, from the director on, Dr. Tom Halpern, and all the people who work there were just these really strong advocates. I remember they organized a meeting probably when they first decided to start, when they were able to do testing, which was probably maybe in '86. They invited a group of us up to Mohican State Park, and we spent a couple days there talking about how to help the community deal with HIV and AIDS, including what kind of protocol to use to have people tested and how to give people results. And I was one of the really strong advocates about, you have to do this in person. You can't do this over the phone. And this is a huge deal for somebody to be told you have AIDS, or you're positive. Well, actually, I think at first we just told people they had AIDS and you were positive on this test, and which always meant you have AIDS. It didn't mean you have this this disease that could kill you. It was like, you have this fatal disease. You now have HIV and you're going to die. Just a matter of time. So with them, we started through the Ohio Department of Health. They gave us money to do that first weekend of recovery, and we probably had 50 to 100 people at that first weekend, and we actually had scheduled it we might have scheduled it at Mohican State Park. I don't remember which one it was, but I had told them what we were doing, and I thought everything was fine. And like days before, they freaked out. They're like, "You're bringing people with AIDS here?" Oh, no, we can't deal with that. So we wound up going to the Holiday Inn downtown and did the weekend of recovery there. Thankfully, whoever the manager was really very supportive. He might even have been gay himself, I'm not sure, but they welcomed us, and even though there were lots of other hotel guests there, some of whom were somewhat freaked out that there were all these gay men with AIDS running around, somehow we got through that weekend, and that started years and years. I think I led the first 50 weekends of recovery with what became the Ohio AIDS Coalition. And we did those like 4 times a year, and we moved all around the state. We did them up in Cleveland and in Akron and Sandusky. Don probably told you about lots of those places. And the facilitators for the weekend, a lot of them were social workers, but my training was pretty traditional in terms of, you provide therapy, you have talk therapy, and then I learned about all these other kinds of interventions as well, like therapeutic touch, which a lot of nurses are trained in, rebirthing, which is this process where you go back and remember your birth and deal with whatever traumatic thing might have occurred there. I mean, it was, when I first learned about it, I was like, Buck Harris, I already mentioned, had worked with this rebirther up in Cleveland, and he like raved about her, and I was like, all right, whatever, you go do that thing. I don't think I'll have anything to do with it. And then I got to experience it myself. I was like, wow, it was amazing. And we did music therapy, we did art therapy, we did sound therapy. So we had massage therapy. So we just did whatever it was that people came to us as alternative kind of healing methods. Because like I said, at the time, there was nothing. And then even when AZT came, it was a pretty hard road. And then they had other drugs. And before long, people had these like handful of pills that they were taking in all different colors, and every 4 hours. I mean, it was intense. Mm-hmm. So we would gather somewhere between 50 to 75 men and eventually women who would come for the weekend, and we'd do, I think, 3 or 4 support groups during that time, and it was really powerful. I mean, I think it really, it certainly changed the quality of people's lives, whether or not it changed the longevity or not. That was one of the most difficult parts. Don and I led a support group at Affirmations. He came up. I met him through the Ohio AIDS Coalition, and I think he started at Affirmations in '88, maybe. And we did that group from 86. 86 to 98. So for 12 years we had, every Monday night we had anywhere from 10 to 25 or 30 people crammed into I had a pretty big office because it had a loft, and so had lots of couches, but we wound up having to split into like 3 groups in order to have enough space for people to be able to share with each other, because you can't do a group with 30 people. Not well. So we were doing those weekends of recovery 4 times a year, and we were doing that weekly group. And that became, one of the primary parts of our practice, was just helping people with HIV and AIDS, and continued with the support services with the buddy program. I think I did that for maybe 3 or 4 years, and then eventually the task force began to have enough money to hire staff. And then that switched from being a volunteer organization to a professionally led organization.
The Weekends of Recovery, they went on for, how many years did that go on for?
Well, I led them until, let's see, I think I led them till from maybe 88 to 92, and then Don took over, and I don't know how long they went on for, probably at least another 10 years.
Were there treatments that you found more successful than others that you learned of during these weekends of recovery?
Well, having, aside from the medical treatments that became available, that eventually made HIV a treatable disease, so people didn't have to progress on to AIDS. But the healing power of community is something that's been a core part of my beliefs for a really long time. It just even being involved with the gay organizations back from college days, from University of North Carolina, having this condition, this experience of growing up feeling shame about whatever it is, whether it's being gay or lesbian or bi or trans, as we now have the experience of being able to talk about, having HIV and AIDS, which was this very shameful experience for decades, because it was always associated with, well, you got this because of what you did, and so that the power of community was a very healing aspect of dealing with that shame, because once you're able to talk about it, you no longer felt like you were the only one or that there was something wrong with you. It really was a very empowering way for people to begin to reclaim their lives. And then, I moved from there to doing trauma work and with male survivors of sexual trauma. And again, it was that same experience of it's the power of community that makes all the difference of being able to speak about whatever it is that feels so shameful and so secret, that is more healing than probably anything else. I'm a psychologist. I provided therapy for people for decades, and individual therapy is really important, and being able to help people work through memories of whatever they experienced is really important. And having support is essential. I mean, healing by yourself, no matter what it is you're facing, is extraordinarily difficult.
With your work with the AIDS Task Force and the Ohio AIDS Coalition, how long did that go on for?
So I was with the Ohio AIDS Coalition until 92.
Okay.
Like I said, the HIV spectrum group went on until 98. And so I didn't start working with male survivors until about 2001.
Mm-hmm.
So I went on a pretty long time.
Mm-hmm. So talking about the survivors weekends and retreats that you started, what led you to start that program?
So, first I had to deal with my own sexual trauma history, and I began working on that actually before I got licensed. So probably in 81 or 82, I started that process. And that was a very long process. So I started going, there were a group of people who, back in the 90s, who started, professionals who were working with male survivors who started meeting, and then they started offering conferences, and that the first conference was back in 86, I think, and I went to my first conference to learn about working with male survivors in 88. So I already was working with a lot of male survivors by that time, because I was working with a lot of gay men, and I was working a lot with people with HIV and AIDS, and unfortunately a lot of them had the dual experience of also being traumatized as kids through sexual assaults of many kinds. So I was already working with them and doing therapy groups, not specifically for trauma, but many of them were trauma survivors. So I went to that first conference in 88, and in 1994, a group of us from Ohio organized the organizing conference for what became the National Organization on Male Sexual Victimization, NOMSV, which was like this really awkward kind of title. That's why now it's called MaleSurvivor. It's much easier. But back then, that's the best we could come up with. So in '95, I then we did a small conference that year along with that organizing conference, and then in '95 we had a convention down at the convention center and had several hundred people from around the country, maybe even the world, come to that conference. So I was on the board of NOMSV from '95 and until 2001 probably, and then we started the Weekends of Recovery. So I'd had all that experience doing the AIDS weekend, so I knew how powerful that was. There was a woman who had been doing the weekends from Boston, and she approached MaleSurvivor or NOMSV about doing a weekend, and so I of course said, yeah, let's do one. So we were able to find a few other people, and so we started with like a group of 5 of us who led the first weekend and did it in a cornfield out in Illinois somewhere. And then again, we started doing those weekends, a couple a year, and then 3 a year, and then 4 a year, and wound up getting more and more staff involved who, as NOMSV developed and we had conferences every year, of course, we had more and more people who were now trained to work with male survivors who we felt like, okay, this would be another good person to add to the staff. And so I was the chairperson of those weekends of recovery from 2001 till essentially 2017 when I stopped. I changed roles. I was chairperson for about 10 years, and I was co-chairperson, and then we eventually had a team of 4 of us that led the weekends. I was involved in the administration of those weekends for 16 years. And again, we structured them in a lot of the same ways as the weekends of recovery for HIV and AIDS. The difference was that it was much more therapy-based. So we were teaching therapy skills, them, teaching about relaxation and meditation. A big part of the weekend was where men had an opportunity to tell the story of what they experienced, what was done to them. And that happened on the morning of Saturday. So they'd come in Friday afternoon, and we'd get them kind of feeling safe enough. And many of these men had never, ever talked to another male survivor in their lives. So most of them came in really terrified, much like the men and women who came to the weekends of recovery for HIV and AIDS. A lot of them had never met anyone else. So it was just to be in a room with somebody else who shared the same experience was both empowering and terrifying all at the same time. So over the course of the weekend, as they learned skills and felt safe enough to tell their stories, and we then worked with them to develop some other tools to help them figure out how to move from being this victim to having some power in their bodies. We incorporated all my stuff that I learned in therapeutic recreation about play, came right back into my work with the weekends of recovery, because in the evening on Saturday we played, whether it was throwing balls to each other, bouncing balls. We did all sorts of crazy stuff. Played with parachutes. I mean, all the things you would do on a playground. But now these are all these adult men who've never probably bonded with other men in that way. And so that was another powerful way to release them and give them an opportunity, because a lot of them came into the weekends, being very frozen in their bodies. And so over the course of the weekend, they get to relax and play and have fun. And then on Sunday, we would spend that whole morning talking with them about, okay, you've been in this really supportive environment now where you've been able to tell your story and you've gotten to be yourself and play and relax, and now you're going back home again. And let's talk about what that's going to be like, because you're not going to be in this nice little cocoon anymore. So that was really important to help prepare them. And eventually we wound up developing, the men would come back from the weekends and they developed support groups in their town, wherever they came from. And we had several, one or two support groups here in Columbus that were developed, and this still is a good supportive community for male survivors of sexual trauma.
It became a very successful program. Were you surprised by the success in any way, or?
Well, we struggled for a pretty long time getting people there. I mean, I think that first weekend we had, I don't know, like I said, 10 or 12 people on. And then the numbers slowly grew. Again, part of that was making connections with other therapists. And part of any time you're working with somebody, if you're a therapist, referring them somewhere else can feel like, I don't know who these people are. And I don't want to send my client to this experience and have them come back being worse than they were when I sent them there. So we had to build trust within the psychological and therapeutic community to help them feel that we were safe in what we were doing and that we were well grounded. It really wasn't until the Oprah show in 2010 when it exploded. Exploded because, it was Oprah, And now people from all over the world were talking about male survivors. And that was her hope, was that she'd blow open the doors. Because up until that time, she'd had a male survivor on her program from time to time, but it was really Tyler Perry's idea to have the audience be 200 men. I don't think she would have done it otherwise. So she said, well, why don't you tell your story? And Tyler was like, you are a crazy woman. But Oprah being Oprah, they were really good friends. So she taped him and he told his whole story. And then he became like the co-host of that 200 Men show. And so it was after that show that really we then had a lot more success in terms of attracting people.
Such is the power of Oprah.
Such is the power of Oprah, when they first started planning that show, they approached us as NAMSV, I guess we were MaleSurvivor by then. And there were a couple other organizations that they approached, and I think of that 200 men, probably about 60 or 70 had been to a weekend of recovery. So I told them that I didn't want to be one of the men. I wanted to be in the audience because I wanted to support these guys, but I was in this very public, administrative position. I didn't want to tell my story in front of all those people. So they were like, fine. So they started calling me for advice and help. And Stacy would call me at 8 o'clock in the morning. She'd call me at 10 o'clock at night. And I'm like, Stacy, when do you sleep? do you sleep? She go, oh, yeah, we get a little bit of sleep here and there. But, so they really worked for months intensely on getting ready. And they interviewed every single man in that audience. And then they also invited some of their partners to be there as well. So they interviewed everybody. Had everybody tell them their story before they came to the show, which was amazing. I mean, they took such great care, more than what you would ever expect. You would just say, oh, sure, come, and you're a male survivor. No, it wasn't like that at all. I mean, that's Oprah's integrity.
Right.
So it was and she had originally was just going to do one day, one program, and the staff was meeting the week before, and actually it was even on Monday when they changed their mind. So on Friday, the week before, they called me. I was supposed to come in on Tuesday, and they said, well, would you come in on Monday instead, because we'd like to have you be the expert. And they had, up to this point, said, we're not having any expert. We don't need an expert. We have all these men. They're the experts. I'm like, sure. Thinking, okay, I have a client scheduled all day Monday, and I had to completely, tell all of them, I can't come in. So took care of that, and so on Monday, they then just realized they had so much material, there was no possible way they could do this in one day. So then they decided to tape 2 shows. And again, it was just, and Tyler was there the whole time, and he was contributing from his own experience, and of course, the men in the audience were just amazing. I asked the producer when I got there, it's like, well, what's going to happen here? And she said, I don't know, we just do this kind of organically. I mean, here I would have thought they'd had like storyboards. She She goes, it's just kind of, and they probably did, but all she said to me was just going to be organic, so just flow with it, which was fabulous for me because I was like, oh, okay, I don't have to think of, 50 answers to have in my head. I can just like we're doing, just have a conversation.
Well, so what was the immediate response to that you noticed? Did you?
I got calls from all over the world, literally, of people who were like desperate to get information because, this show went everywhere. And like I said, in terms of the Weekends of Recovery, we went from, struggling to get people to register. And now, because of course I helped them have a whole list of resources that they could post on the Oprah website. So people started going to the website, and she called me like that Monday after, or maybe the next week, and Don answered the phone, and so I'm like getting ready to start with my 10 o'clock appointment, and he says, I think you better take this call. He didn't tell me who it was. So I like pick up the phone. It's like, this is Oprah. And I'm like, oh my God. And I thought she was just calling to say thank you, did a great job, She doesn't do that apparently. So she really was calling to find out if I'd written a book. And I was like, oh, Oprah, God, I wish I'd written a book, but I just never had time. She goes, well, if you ever do, let me know. And we hang up. So Tyler Perry had given me his card and said, please keep in touch. And I'm already like out of my mind. I'm just going, I'm like this, small town therapist from Columbus, Ohio. And here I am on this national stage. And here Tyler Perry is giving me his card. So I called Tyler, and he goes, Howard, if Oprah Winfrey said, I'll help you if you write a book, you better write a book. Don't waste another second. So now I'm running the Weekends of Recovery and running my private practice, and it's like, okay, I'm going to write a book.
Wow.
So I write the book. And call Oprah's Stacy, and I said, could you ask Oprah what she meant by I can help you? So she found me a publishing agent who was Dr. Phil's publishing agent, and they secured Hay House to publish the book that I wrote. So that's how all that happened. So that was one of the outcomes that I got that incredible opportunity to write a book and, again, reach a lot more people, which is what Tyler had said to me. You can only reach so many people through the Weekends of Recovery if you write a book,
Mm. Wow.
So, that's an experience that very few people get. And so I was incredibly grateful for that. And but just getting the word out and getting people to feel free enough to be able to come to a Weekend of Recovery was just so huge. And we wound up having waiting lists after that for years because we just had all these people who now felt free enough to be able to come speak their truth and work on their healing. So that was phenomenal. And that effect lasted probably 10 years, I'd say.
Mm. Are the Weekends still going on?
Oh, yeah. So they eventually there were administrative problems with MaleSurvivor, and so Jim Struve, who was my co-chair, and the team decided to create their own organization, which is called Men Healing. So they're going very strong and still doing 3 or 4 weekends a year. So and they're doing virtual support groups. I'm working on a prison project where their prisoners get access to a tablet, and on that tablet they can access all sorts of information. So one of the ways that the prisons in some states, including Ohio, have used them is to put recovery information about from drugs and alcohol. And so they've been open to having Men Healing provide information for these tablets. So we're in a couple different states, I think Ohio and Massachusetts and maybe one other one. So we're working on trying to figure out how to get this kind of information to prisoners, because of course many of them are trauma survivors and have never really dealt with it. So that's another exciting outgrowth of that work.
Jumping back for a minute, it just occurred to me, you had said something along the lines of when you moved to Columbus, there was a void in Columbus because there was only maybe one openly gay counselor or psychologist. And when you were working with Southeast, would it have been okay with them if you had internally labeled yourself as openly gay?
Yeah.
Okay. I was just wondering about that.
Yeah, they were fine with it. So that was not an issue.
Okay. It was more of just the general public being aware.
Yeah. And within a couple years, particularly once Stonewall started, and I don't remember the year that was, but once Stonewall started and they started doing marches, and there were a number of other gay male psychologists and lesbian psychologists who started to be open, and it became a very different place. So in 2000, the director of the Ohio Psychological Association, the executive director, approached me and asked me if I would chair a new committee called the Gay and Lesbian Task Force or Committee. So it's like, sure. So I did that for, I think, 4 years. And so that was, again, the beginning in Ohio, at least, of getting other openly gay psychologists to be able to come forward and work together to figure out what could we do to educate other psychologists. We never organized a Columbus group of therapists, but they're out there, and Affirmations, the practice that I helped found, became one of the practices in town that was known for being a place where people who were struggling with their sexuality could come and talk and feel safe.
Mm-hmm. I imagine that psychology is, but compared to other professions, is psychology a comfortable profession to be out in? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. For most people, yes, but it really depends on the individual person and where they are in terms of their own development. I think because of the shame that we all struggle with, I think initially it's still kind of a scary thing of, are people going to accept me? Are people going to judge me? Are people going to think I only work with gay people, or mm-hmm. or conversely that somehow I shouldn't refer gay people to them because they might not be safe with a gay therapist. I know that sounds mm-hmm. crazy when I say the words, but I'm sure there are people who would think that, that somehow I would, I don't know, or somebody was struggling, I don't want to send them to a gay therapist because they'll just help them come out. It's like, well, that might be a desirable outcome, I mean, it's not like I'm going to say, well, no, if you're not coming out, then I'm not working with you. I mean, if you decide you're straight, it's like, it's fine, whatever. I'm not here to tell you what sexual orientation you should have, but yeah. So mostly yes. I mean, it's a very accepting orientation to have, but I wouldn't say that necessarily that translates immediately to anybody who's openly gay. I mean, certainly in my graduate program, it was not okay, and I'd like to think that that's changed a lot over the course of time.
In your private practice, working within the LGBT community, did you notice trends? Maybe is the of counseling trends. I don't know.
Again, it may be because I wound up specializing in trauma that when I first started private practice, I was seeing a lot of people who were struggling with just coming out, and that was the primary thing they came to therapy to work on. And over the course of time, I rarely saw anybody like that. Mostly I saw people who were dealing with trauma, and maybe, because I became known as one of those people that you were safe to come to, especially after Oprah, but even before that, people were coming with much more complicated problems. So as it became okay to be gay, then that wasn't what people came to therapy for anymore. Not that there weren't plenty of people who were still struggling, but a lot of people, now that they were okay with being gay, now they had to deal with all the other parts of life, like relationship problems and depression and anxiety and then trauma. And so those became more the focus of the work that I was doing. So I can't comment on the whole field, but that was my experience.
So after the Oprah thing, how did, I guess you kind of, at least within the field, you became a mini celebrity. How did you feel about that personally?
It was a great honor. It was, people would now come to the office and they'd feel free to then say, okay, I'm a survivor of sexual trauma, and they'd want to launch right into telling me about their trauma. And I'd be like, hold on a minute. It's like, yes, I was on Oprah, that's true. But that doesn't mean that you're safe with me. You don't even know me. So let's slow down here. I definitely want to hear the story of what you experienced, and I want you to feel safe, and I want to know that you're safe enough in your body before we go launching into that, because you're not going to feel safe if you leave here having done that. I know you want to get it out, and it feels like that's really important, and it is. I've worked really hard not to let it go to my head, because it's like, yeah, I was on Oprah. It's like, okay, yeah, that is a tremendous honor, and that's great, but it doesn't really mean anything. So it's special and it's unique and it's important, and it's definitely one of the proudest moments of my career for sure. And I still have to put my pants on and do everything else. It didn't change any of that. I mean, it gave me some more power. It was a funny story. So I started, as I was winding down my practice, one of my colleagues was working in the forensic psychology area and did not know much about sexual trauma. So he asked me if I could consult on some cases with him. So I Sure, why not? Not knowing anything about forensic psychology, I had no training at all in the law or anything like that. So there was a time when I was testifying in northern Ohio, and this prosecuting attorney says to me, well, maybe if you'd spent less time talking to Oprah and Dr. Phil and more time talking to this client, you... I don't remember what he said after that. And I was like floored. I was like, what? I mean, I'd spent 5 or 6 hours with the guy. I didn't spend 20 hours with him, but, enough time to understand what he had experienced. And, I just sat there and speechless because I was like, I don't know what to say to this guy. Sure, you don't attack Oprah and Dr. Phil. I mean, nowhere, And so the judge says to me, "Was that your answer?" And I said, "Yes, Your Honor." It's like, I felt like saying, "You little pipsqueak." I hope there'll be a time when Oprah wants to talk to you.
Right. You should have been like, well, yeah, I talked to them and they both agree with this assessment.
It's like, it was crazy. People would send me their books like I was then going to hand them to Oprah. It's like, I don't have Oprah's phone number. I don't have any personal communication with her. This doesn't grant me any special privileges, Yes, I did have contact with Tyler and was able to ask him for money for MaleSurvivor, and he donated several $100,000 to us, which was tremendous. But, so it's just, the weird part was what people thought about, what that meant about me, that somehow, and none of that was true.
So, what have you been working on recently? What are your kind of current projects?
Well, I've been doing, as I told you, my colleague Bob had got me involved in this legal work. So for the past, I retired in 2017 from private practice, and since then I've just been doing these legal cases, and again, partly because of Oprah, my name got around. Mm-hmm. And so I've been in Ohio, I've been in South Carolina, I've done training with the federal public defenders and working mostly with public defenders around the country. Occasionally I've done some private consultation. I did one recently with a guy who'd been abused, a teenager who'd been abused by a desk clerk in a hotel chain. So I was able to evaluate him and provide testimony. And a lot of times I just provide a written testimony, and sometimes I'll go to court. And that's, the learning curve has been like this. Providing therapy is like a whole different thing. Going into court and testifying requires a whole set of different skills that, I've had to go to lots and lots of workshops to try to figure out how do I do that. And but that's been really incredibly rewarding, because a lot of the work that I've done are people on death row, mostly men, a few women. But these are men who have horrible trauma backgrounds, not just sexual trauma, but sexual trauma piled onto growing up in ghettos or poor places, dealing with poverty, being bullied, experiencing trauma from alcoholic or drug-addicted parents. And so they've had this massive trauma history. And a lot of times what prosecutors do is just say, they're just bad boys, they just make bad decisions. It's all that's wrong with them. They could have made good decisions and they made bad decisions. And so to have a trauma psychologist who could come in and say, wait a minute, actually there's this whole field that has helped establish what is the impact of sexual trauma, what is the impact of trauma, period, on a human being, and these are all the effects. And so you can't just say this is a bad boy. This is a person who's experienced tremendous amount of trauma, and the impact of that is that they're impacted cognitively, they're impacted neurologically, they're impacted in terms of the decisions they make. They oftentimes do things like get in trouble with the law, not because they're bad boys, but because they don't have the ability to figure out what's right and what's wrong. And so that's been tremendously rewarding. Doing a lot of volunteer work. I continue to work with the Ohio Psychological Association. I've been the chair and the co-chair of the Prevention and Wellness Program, which is a program that helps other psychologists figure out how to take care of themselves. Which I've learned through doing all this trauma work is that if I don't take care of myself, I'm going to be useless to anybody else. And being a psychologist is tough work, no matter what kind of client you're dealing with. So really being able to advocate for my colleagues to take better care of themselves has been a rewarding thing too. I volunteer at NEMAP, which is a food pantry down on 11th Avenue, and do that a couple days a week, and that's been really rewarding as well. I sing with the Columbus Gay Men's Chorus. I've been doing that for about 17 years. And that's been very fun and very rewarding as well, and it's a whole different way to try to do advocacy, because we get to sing to all sorts of different people who may not know gay people, and to find out, oh, they're just like, well, they sing really well. So that's been fun. And like I said, I've been with my partner for 45 years now, and that's been incredibly rewarding, lovely, fun experience. And we've just have a really good group of friends, and so we do lots of great things together and travel together.
Well, out of all of your outstanding accomplishments, what do you find most personally edifying or most proud of?
Well, the Oprah experience for sure. But beyond that, I'd say just being trusted. I as I was finishing private practice, I was talking to a couple colleagues about how spiritual psychological therapy is. That's not a term that I had used before. And so for me, the rewarding part is that people trust me to be open to share whatever it is that they're experiencing. And it's such a deep place of honor to have somebody be willing to be vulnerable with me in that way, no matter what it is that they've struggled with. And I'm just really proud to have been one of those people that people feel safe with.